In the 1962 film The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, directed by John Ford, Jimmy Stewart plays Senator Rance Stoddard, a man with a long and storied career in government, on the short list of becoming the new vice president, who one day travels from Washington to the small frontier town of Shinbone to attend the funeral of Tom Donovan, a local rancher played by John Wayne. 25 years prior, Stoddard had made a name for himself when he shot and killed the notorious outlaw Liberty Valance, an act that made him a local legend and kickstarted his political career. But this is not the truth. It was in fact Donovan who had killed Valance, sniping him in secret during Valance's confrontation with Stoddard. With Donovan dead, Stoddard feels it only right to tell the truth to some reporters. But once the story is told, they do this.
Well, you're not going to use this story, Mr. Scott?
No, sir. This is the West, sir. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend.
Today we're talking about the film Legend of the Galactic Heroes, Overture to a New War, which is both a retelling of the first two episodes of the Galactic Heroes OVA and a bridge between the first film, My Conquest of the Sea of Stars, which we talked about last time, and the OVA. Released in December of 1993, between the anime's second and third seasons, the first half is a new story about our two protagonists, Reinhard and Yang, returning home for a little bit of shore leave, connecting with loved ones, and then getting ready for the next battle. The second half is a remake of the battle of the first two episodes, with Reinhard's Imperial fleet outmaneuvering the Free Planets Alliance, until Yang is forced to take over when his commanding officer is injured. Under Yang's command, the Alliance fleet forces their enemies into a ceasefire, playing out more or less the way it did in the OVA. So the first question you end up asking after watching this film is, what was this for? Why did this have to be made? What was the point? As an elevator pitch, there's not a lot to get out of it. The second half of the film is a straight remake, and while remakes in anime are like super common, the amount of remakes and reboots Japanese media go through makes our 3 Spider-Man movie continuities in 10 years seem quaint. The first two episodes are still being sold on VHS, and while I can't speak for the discourse at the time, what with it not being on the internet, but instead on con floors and magazine letter pages, I can't imagine there was a lot of, I love Galactic Heroes, but those first two episodes were rubbish and they should redo them. As for the first half, while this is new material, it's not exactly critical material to the overarching plot. If you watch this movie in lieu of the first two episodes, there is information you get earlier than if you had watched just the series, like who the heck this guy is and why him dying in the first episode was so important. But since we get this information eventually in the series, what you have is 45 minutes of characters sitting around drinking and making small talk. Again, I don't know the discourse of the Japanese fans at the time, but I doubt it was all, you know what we were really missing from our continuity? How drunk Yang got after My Conquest of the Sea of Stars. Obviously, this is a setup for me to reveal that this film has a lot more going under the hood than its elevator pitch. But before we get into that, I want to discuss Paratextuality, the relationship one text has with another text. I'm basically cribbing this bit from Browse Held High's video on Buckaroo Banzai. It's a good video, you should check it out. But anyway, according to the French literary theorist Gerard Genette, there are 5 ways a text can relate to another text. First is intertextuality, which comes in the form of quotations and allusions.
The undiscovered country. The future.
The undiscovered country. Hamlet, Act 3. Scene 1.
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
There actually isn't a lot of this in Galactic Heroes, as it removes itself from direct references to Earth culture. But the one big exception is the use of pre-existing classical music. Using Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, one of the composer's most famous pieces, over this character's death scene implies an importance to this scene, an important composition for an important scene, creating an intertextual connection. Next is paratextuality, the text that surrounds another text, like the title, the advertising, summaries on the back of a book cover, those kind of things. Smaller texts that guide you to consume the larger text. Next, Architextuality, the designation of a text as part of a genre. Galactic Heroes is science fiction, and while it may not make direct references to things like Star Wars or Macross, it is nonetheless connected to these works through the science fiction genre, and makes you look at the ways Galactic Heroes is both similar and different to works in science fiction. Then, metatextuality, when a text has critical commentary of another text. The video you're watching right now is a metatextual relationship to the text of Galactic Heroes. Finally, hypotextuality, when a text follows another text, either as a continuation, as in sequels, or in transformation, as in parody. So with that in mind, what's Overture to a New War's transtextual relationship with the rest of the Galactic Heroes franchise? Obviously there's hypotext, as the film is a direct continuation of My Conquest as a Sea of Stars, but there's also intertextuality, as to remake the first 2 episodes of the OVA is to quote and allude to these earlier texts. This earlier text informs your reading of the newer text. You don't need to have seen the first 2 episodes to enjoy Overture to a New War, but having seen them and knowing in what ways the work is different helps define what the film is ultimately going for. So let's take one element common in both versions of the story and examine how each version handles it. So you remember this guy? This is military commander Jean-Robert Lapp from the Free Planets Alliance. He dies on the flagship of the Alliance's 6th Fleet when Reinhardt's fleet attacks it. In the OVA, Lapp is first mentioned in passing by Yang, who just identifies him as a friend. We then first meet him discussing tactics with his commanding officer around a dinner table. We don't learn much about him besides him sharing some of Yang's pragmatic opinions on the battle. When his ideas are shot down, Lapp backs down. He apologizes and yes sirs. Now, Legend of the Galactic Heroes has so many characters introduced in rapid succession that it's easy to lose track of who is who early on, and even harder to determine who will be important. The next scene with Lapp is his death scene. And in the chaos of the battle and the change to a fiery red lighting, I actually didn't recognize his character as Lapp the first time I watched it. His death scene is memorable though in how over the top it is. Impaled to the wall by a pole the size of a redwood, Lapp uses his last breaths in hopes that Yang doesn't end up like him. Yang and Lapp share the same sensibilities and intelligence, but Lapp didn't have the will to take control of the situation. Lapp is a cautionary tale of what happens when the younger generation doesn't take over. Then, as Lapp expires, he mentions a woman named Jessica and pulls out a hologram card with a woman's face projected from it. It's easy to pass this off as a secondary detail, just the girlfriend picture in the cockpit of a World War II fighter pilot kind of thing. You won't realize that this is the introduction of another important character. Lapp isn't mentioned again until 16 minutes into episode 2, with a face in the stars moment and a flashback to remind the audience, oh right, that guy. We then go to the planet Hennison, where we get a proper introduction to Jessica playing the piano while a picture of Lapp sits on top. She then calls a government office to get information on Lapp, who we now learn was her fiancé. She learns he died in battle and weeps on the piano. Later, Yang is accompanied by his friend Dusty to visit Lapp's grave in a massive graveyard. The sun is setting and the lighting is warm. He finds Jessica there, dressed in widow black. Yang and Jessica know each other, but it's not clear how closely. Maybe they only know each other through Lapp. Jessica has a short monologue about war before walking off, and Yang leaves flowers on Lapp's grave. And that's how the OVA uses the character of Lapp. Oh, we learn a little bit more about him later on, and Jessica herself becomes a very important character, but this initial use of the character provides 2 narrative functions. One, as a cautionary tale for Yang, warning him not to be a pushover like Lapp was, and 2, to give our main character someone to mourn after the battle's conclusion, because just going, phew, glad we survived that, doesn't have the same emotional punch. Lapp is a function to the story, not really a character, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But let's see how the film handles Lap. Lap's introduction comes in the first part of the film, the original content linking My Conquest of the Sea of Stars to the OVA. When Yang returns to Hennison on shore leave, both Lap and Jessica are there to greet him. It becomes clear through their dialogue and body language that these three characters don't just know each other, but are good friends. Lap pulls Yang aside and tells him that he's going to propose to Jessica and wants to know Yang's thoughts. Suddenly, there's an odd, unspoken tension to these scenes, and you have this oh shit love triangle realization that's mostly lacking from the OVA. What follows is, in my opinion, the best sequence in the entire film. While we have sound effects and a score, all dialogue is muted, including Lap's proposal to Jessica and the three of them hanging out and dancing later. Because it's what's not being said that matters. These characters are not being honest with their feelings. Jessica's reservations on the marriage, Yang's feelings towards Jessica, Lap being aware of the tension in the room. Monogamy is a curse. After a night of drunken depression, word gets out of a battle coming up, and Yang and Lap get ready to rejoin the fleet. Jessica makes Lap promise to come back in one piece. Viewers with knowledge of what's about to happen realize the tragedy of this moment. So that's the new material. Now we get into the remake stuff. The battle gets underway, and we get the scene with Lap and the commanding officer at the dining room table. But this time, things are much more confrontational. Lap is less submissive, and the commanding officer is more a blustering bully, getting other people in the room to gang up on Lap, and Lap never gives up on the discussion. The conversation is instead interrupted with news of the Imperial forces arriving. Lap tries to impose himself more on the bridge. He tries to change their tactics so that they won't be destroyed, but the commanding officer is just so fed up with Lap that he orders the man arrested. The flagship is attacked and destroyed, and instead of that dramatic pull through the chest death, Lap succumbs to the flames of the burning ship. Moonlight Sonata kicks in, and Lap doesn't even think of Yang. His thoughts are on Jessica and the future they'll never get to have. The goofy hologram card is gone because we don't need to put a face to the name this time, and instead Lap has Jessica's handkerchief, a more timeless memento. He never once thinks of or mentions Yang. We then cut to Jessica's apartment where she's playing the piano, and we learn that Moonlight Sonata was actually diegetic music. Jessica was unknowingly playing Lap's funeral march. Lap's picture falls off the piano, and this time the picture is of Lap, Jessica, and Yang together. They are permanently bonded, with the cracks hanging over Lap's face. It's a bit too on the nose if you ask me, but undeniably poetic. The scene at the graveyard is now snow-covered, and Yang arrives alone. Dusty isn't there this time. There's no words shared when Yang finds Jessica there, just tears. And that's how the film handles Lap. Now, of course, Lap is a better character in the film because there's 45 minutes of extra material that allows us to get to know him longer and in greater detail, and this gives his death more weight. But even just considering the remake material, Lap serves a very different function than he did in the OVA. He's no longer a cautionary tale for Yang. It's no longer about what Yang's fate will be if he doesn't start imposing his new ideas into the military hierarchy. Film Lap is, if anything, more insistent, more confrontational than Yang ever was. But it doesn't matter how strong of will and opinion Lap is. The system of the Alliance will keep old ideas in place at the cost of human lives. In the film, the three-pronged attack that Alliance takes is explained to have been a successful battle strategy in some famous battle years ago, so it would work exactly the same now, right? This version of Lap dies because of an old broken system, not because he was too weak-willed. To summarize, in the OVA, Lap's death is to serve the character of Yang, to show why he is exceptional and worthy of the title of a galactic hero. In the film, Lap's death is a condemnation of a system that perpetuates war, but doesn't do it well, causing millions of needless sacrifices every battle because the leaders are too old and stuck in their ways. And this brings us to the intertextuality of the film, how it evokes the original OVA. What is the film saying about the original work with its changes? Well, it reframes the original narrative away from the heroic deeds of Yang and Reinhard. Yang isn't special in this film because Lap is his equal. And I didn't focus on it, but Reinhard's stoic persona is gutted in the presence of his sister. The Galactic Heroes of the title doesn't seem quite so grand in this version of the story. By being a remake made so long after the original, one that deflates some of the majesty of the original, Overture to a New War feels like Stoddard telling the reporters what really happened, how it isn't quite the story people fell in love with. And now fans of the franchise have to decide. Do you stick with the truth, or print the legend?